bonus early non-professional discussion here. I just want to make sure that everyone can hear everyone okay. I've done a lot of tech work on my audio levels and everything, so please leave something in the chat and let us know how everything sounds.
Check 1, 2. I'm just gonna go ahead and keep pretending to be cool. Yeah, okay, hold on here. I'll get our recording started so we can just rip into it here. All right. Welcome to the Moving Forward podcast. This is your host, Corey Cottrell. And of course, we got my co-host and good buddy, Rio Verdon here.
Hey, guys.
And we're classing up to join yet again for a post-debate session with Seth from the Dividend Report. Seth, what's up, man?
It feels so good to be back in the wine cave.
Oh, yeah, the wine cave. Yeah, usually I'm a lot more inebriated for these just because the debates have been either completely boring or infuriating.
Yeah.
I mean, so like post debate, but now post Iowa too. We got a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
We sure do, but I'm not
show over.
Yeah, I think that really kind of says how enthused all of us are about the current state of affairs.
I don't know. Like Bloomberg's doing really good.
So that's my first point. I wanted just to immediately dive into that. How much do these debates even matter? Because Bloomberg's yet to appear on stage for even one, and looking at the polling, it appears that doesn't matter at all for him.
Well, I mean, it matters about $250,000 worth, or billion, sorry. Right, so like it as long as you're worth $60 billion and you don't mind spending $1 billion to win an election, you can just buy it.
Clearly, but you know, the YangGang online has been just so tense, especially during the debate. You know, they were expecting Yang to be putting his gloves off, really diving in, blowing up the debate stage, and then seeing some kind of post-debate surge. But my entire thing is like, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't really even matter. The debates don't have any significant effect on polling.
I actually agree with Seth. I mean, it's pretty clear that in this wide field, they don't have much of an impact because, like you said, somebody who's not even in the debates is doing well. Yang actually did fine in Iowa. He outperformed his polls in the first round of votes. The media is reporting the second round of votes, which doesn't actually reflect the number of people who actually voted for Andrew Yang. That reflects the number of precincts that were able to where he met 15%, right? Which, when you're polling at 5% in a state, that's not going to happen. So, we all kind of knew he wasn't going to get any delegates. I think it's good that the front runners are pretty evenly divided.
Yep.
In the end, it was something like 14 delegates for Buttigieg, 12 for Sanders, 8 for Warren, 6 for Biden, 1 for Klobuchar. I mean, nobody really came out on top. Buttigieg won the state, I guess, but it's not, with a bunch of states that are going to be divvied up that way in a wide field, that's not terrible for an insurgent candidate like Andrew Yang.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. That in fact is the only reason why he's got a viable path at all. Right? Like if the top 4 keep splitting it, 15 to 20%, then if we can get to 15%, suddenly we're in the top 4, right? And then the media narrative might start to shift a little bit, and then we have a shot.
Right,
so
and I mean,
the more they split it up, the better.
Yeah, there's a few polls here and there where Yang has actually pulled ahead of Buttigieg nationally. So the guy who won the first state, Yang has been ahead of nationally in some major polls.
Yep,
that's also not a minor thing. Did you guys see the rumors, though, that his campaign started laying off staff? I tend not to lend a lot of credence to that, but...
Yeah, I saw rumors that Trump was going to drop out and endorse Andrew Yang, too.
That's true. And all of the sources were anonymous for that. I was like...
Yeah, no, it was clearly bullshit, and which is why I loved it. It was just like putting rumors where we need to put it.
I mean, until there's actual evidence. We are the math people, after all. Until there's actual evidence.
Yeah. Yang laid off a bunch of people after Iowa because he needs better people, right? Like they were people that were really, really heavy on excitement and really, really weak on organizing a ground game.
Yeah.
Because they're there's data on that, and I'm sure they had data on how the ground game was going. And when you're competing with a Bernie Sanders ground game and an Elizabeth Warren ground game, you need to be the best in the world, and they just weren't. Right? There's a lot of energy that wants to get poured into, but unless it gets organized properly, then you're not targeting properly, you're not tracking properly, and you won't win.
Right. Yeah. And the piece that I saw was saying that it was so mismanaged and he doesn't care about his workers. And I'm thinking, like, I'm pretty sure I've read this exact same hit piece about all of the other candidates, and they have political experience, right? The Bernie Sanders workers are always super angry at him, according to every other anonymous article. I mean, whatever.
Yeah, it seems pretty par of the course that even a campaign that would do moderately well in the caucuses are going to be laying off staff afterwards. This is, just something that happens. And my entire point that I continue to try and rail back on is that every single person who's doing any kind of work for Andrew Yang and canvassing and everything, they are a unpaid intern right now, but they're technically going to be paid should he win the election. That's not a very helpful thing to say in midst of those headlines, but I still think that the energy with Yang supporters are still there because that still remains true.
Yeah, seems that way to me. I mean, I think so as far as the debate, are we just like dismissing it as a thing? Like, oh, hey, there's
no,
a debate.
we should talk about it.
Yeah.
I mean, we did some post debate analysis. Seth, thank you for coming on to that. I was like 3 or 4 drink Amy at that point. Greg is nodding. I was heavy on the exuberance and light on the good analysis. But yeah, I mean, I didn't get the impression that really much happened, except I personally wanted Yang to come out with guns blazing, and instead he came out like Yang, which is a thing. Except for the one part that I think the Democratic Party needs to face is they had a giant talk about race and never once asked the Asian American what he thought about it, and everybody else was super white.
Yeah.
So yeah, that wasn't a good look.
So let's go ahead and talk about that real quick, because I don't know, I almost got in trouble speaking about this because I am a privileged man of Caucasian color, white.
Wait, you're white?
I am, yes. Although
I don't even know.
I have more Cherokee in my blood than Elizabeth Warren, so I have that going for me. But I mentioned something on Twitter, and you guys let me know if you want to have this discussion or not, because I don't really know how this works online. I know Rogan got his own kind of pushback when he says something about this and something about that, but I tried to make a point where Steyer, at the point that he brought up race in the debate that you were talking about, Yang was raising his hand for 5 minutes at that point, and Steyer's like, we haven't had one discussion about race during this entire moment, and the one candidate of color is over there completely getting excluded by the moderators. I thought that was pretty interesting. But when Yang mentioned this is how we help black communities, black net worth is going to be below zero by 2050, you got to put cash directly into the hands of people, Steyer took the mic after him and said, I actually disagree with Yang on this point, and that he brought up reparations, and from what I recall, reparations hadn't even been mentioned before Steyer said that.
Right out of the blue.
Right, so he dug up reparations. He accused Yang of trying to say that he wasn't for reparations, which Yang said in his Breakfast Club interview that he was, in fact. He sees universal basic income as having more utility, and this was the tweet that I made, and it started getting a little bit of attention that I was like, oh no, I hope this doesn't take off. But I said, what is more important for these communities? A one-time check of, what are we saying, $20,000? Is that a reparation check? Or $30,000? Let's say $50,000. A one-time check of $50,000, or continual cash flow to every single member in that community, unconditional, every month, $1,000 cash flow, which, sure, it'll take a couple of years to get to the amount of that one $50,000 check. But this has so much more utility that as an avenue for reparations, this seems to be the thing to focus more on. And then people were saying, well, this is two separate issues, right? Reparations is for social justice. It's for repairing the wrongs of how society has treated this marginalized group for decades, and universal basic income for economic justice. And my entire point is I find that the two are really the same thing. I believe that Martin Luther King Jr.'s, is it his son, who has been like favorable of Yang, I believe. He made a tweet and he said something like my father said, having a place at the diner, in an unsegregated manner is so important, but what's the point if you can't purchase a meal? That's kind of the overarching point that I was trying to make in my tweet, but I can't really talk about these things because I'm a white individual, right?
Well, no, you can, and I think it's on us to be sensitive for it and understand that we're given a lot of latitude and privilege or whatever. All that stuff is real. Opinions are going to happen. I'm glad that you okay, because he was fighting for UBI, not for reparations, and I think that's an important point. Because looking at how poor white people and poor black people get pitted against each other was something that was on his mind a lot, and rightfully so, right? So we could spend the next 10 or 15 years trying to get reparations passed, or under a Yang presidency, considering how ridiculously bipartisan traction is for UBI as it starts to come back up. I think UBI would get passed maybe 10 times faster than reparations. So if you're an African American community, do you want pie in the sky policy that maybe is going to give you economic and social justice where other people aren't going to get it, or do you want it where every poor person's going to get it? Right.
And on the point of being pie in the sky, part of that is in the framing of what your reparations are. And the unfortunate thing is that we can understand that reparations aren't like a punishment for other people to atone for the sins of the past. Instead, it is a recognition that this wealth had been taken forcefully. But it's not a zero-sum game, right? It's not these people doing worse so these people can do better. But while we can understand that, you have to think of the framing that the opposition is going to have to reparations. And there are 66 million white people in poverty right now, which is less of a percentage of the whole when it comes to minority communities, but more numerically as a total than the other communities. So you've got 66 million people who are white and impoverished. All of them would be looking at reparations saying, well, why are they getting this? Is it making me even worse off than I already am? You have to think about how pie in the sky means that this is going to be, unfortunately, I think, divisive, as well as we also used Asian American labor to basically build our entire railroad system. So are reparations only going to one community? This is going to cause a whole bunch of whereas
if
UBI.
You ask the Bernie Sanders supporters, they'll tell you that the capitalist class has been exploiting the proletariat forever. What do they get for that? I personally, I reject. I don't actually see UBI as economic justice or anything like that. I see it as actually a more fair way to reform our social safety net and as tax relief for the middle class. I think that it'll be more effective than any of the programs we have now to end working poverty. It'll be more effective than any of the programs we have now to end homelessness. It'll grow the middle class because it will actually basically subsidize the incomes of people in the working class and make it easier for them to invest and build wealth. And because it'll give de facto tax relief to people who are in danger of being taxed out of the middle class right now. That's why I support it. It's nothing to do with anything like economic justice. I don't believe in, I don't believe that it's the government's job to ensure that everybody has all of their basic needs met necessarily. I just think that we already have a system in place that's meant to do that. It's not working. It's actually shrinking the middle class. It's actually trapping people in poverty, and it's not doing anything about homelessness. So if we're going to try to fix the problem, let's make it better and actually solve the problem. All this money that all our tax money is going toward these things, and they're not working. So let's try something else.
I agree with that. And I think the utility of shattering this scarcity mindset would unify people of all socioeconomic backgrounds and actually help if we are really wanting to acknowledge and try to repair some of the damage of the past. It's got to come from a place where we have already kind of rejected scarcity and accepted the possibility of abundance. And I think that's a unifying place to start making those kinds of decisions.
Yeah, and I think what you said about scarcity is key because it's about getting past the zero-sum view of economics,
Right.
which the far left and the alt-right have in common right now. They both clearly think that they're trapped in this war where there's limited resources and, they want to take it away from white people and give it to black people, or, well, black people never had their fair shake. And so it's this identity politics, Cold War that's tearing our country apart. And there's really only one candidate running who has the ability to take all of that populist rage from both sides and channel it in a healthy, positive direction that makes everybody's lives better.
Yeah.
That's why I personally think that conservatives and moderates and the establishment would be stupid not to join, progressives and populists in supporting Andrew Yang's candidacy, because it's in their interest to do so. I mean, are people who like me who are concerned about conserving what's good about our society, are we going to be happy if Bernie Sanders gets nominated and you've got two populists stoking up a bunch of rage on both sides? And I mean, our Cold War could turn into a real civil war. I mean, you don't know what's going to happen. We are living in history. You can't take things for granted. And so, we need to do something to appease all of this populist rage. And, Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg, as much as I like those guys, they're not going to do it. Bernie Sanders is probably just going to make things worse. Trump is definitely going to make things worse. I'm a little frustrated if you're noticing it. I'm really annoyed at the people of Iowa for not being smarter. Sorry.
There is definitely a disappointment in how people of Iowa turned out, but at the same time, there were some structural issues in play during the caucuses that may or may not add up to enough to say, well, it wasn't just the people that failed in Iowa. It was a failure of the caucus system in general, and hopefully...
I don't know if they failed. They just have different opinions from me. I just think they're wrong.
Yeah. No, we both agree there. Seeing Klobuchar perform in the way she did was just a slap in the face to me, personally. And it looks like, I don't know, I just saw something on a subreddit, which this is just based upon very, very few numbers in New Hampshire right now. But Klobuchar...
Honestly, Seth, you don't even want to mention it. You don't even want to mention it. It's less than 50 votes.
Yeah, but still, Klobuchar...
but nothing.
Okay.
It literally is meaningless.
All right.
It doesn't mean... I've seen that. I've seen those numbers up from this morning. It's like literally 30 people. Like, you could literally go to a diner and find completely and totally opposite results anywhere in New Hampshire. It doesn't mean anything yet.
But even
they shouldn't have even reported that. That's
people are going to do that, right?
Yeah.
But it showed a complete lack of understanding of how these things work. That the YangGang, not everyone obviously, but enough of them completely and totally glommed onto that to think that it was interesting. It is in no way interesting, right? Like right now, Bernie Sanders is winning New Hampshire by 25 to 30% in the polls. He's going to land around 25 to 30%. That's just a fact, right? Like that, the best I think that we can hope for is that I think Yang was polling in around 7%. Like, I think there's a non-zero probability he could get over 10%. I'm just looking for a really, really strong outperformance in polls. They're not going to be able to ignore him like they did in Iowa. And honestly, I think he outperformed the polls even more in Iowa than got reported, because so many of the precincts actually counted him as zero initially, which was ridiculous, Chet included. Right. So we'll see. Yeah, I mean, that, like, Amy Klobuchar, like, gaining steam. I mean, clearly she's the sort of establishment Democrat darling at the moment. It doesn't mean anything, right? Nationally, she is still polling less than Andrew Yang most of the time. Right. So it's just that they glommed on to Biden for a long time. And I don't know if you guys were listening the 5,000 times that I told people this. I told everyone Biden wasn't going to be a thing, and he's not. And honestly, Amy Klobuchar isn't going to be able to last either. And I'm not as sure of that one because Greg actually just gave me the side eye. I'm not as sure as that one because she's actually, got real legislative chops, but she's about as charismatic as a doorstop. It's just the folksy thing might work in the Midwest, but it's not going to work anywhere else. So I don't know. We'll see. And besides, Bloomberg's just going to sweep in and buy the fucking thing anyway. So who gives a shit?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Midwest thing gives her an advantage in the general election, but not necessarily so much in a primary. That's true.
Right.
So one moment in the debate that I thought Yang did awesomely, and I'm sure you guys probably agree, was when I don't think he was even called on. Pete was talking about Trump and how bad Trump is. And then Yang came in and said, well, Trump isn't really the cause of our problems. He's a symptom of our problems. And we have a chance to actually solve some problems and not just beat Trump. Yes, we have to beat Trump, but more importantly, we need ideas, 21st century ideas that are actually going to solve our problems. I thought that was great. He was differentiating himself from the person who was the front runner coming out of the first state. Maybe not even called on. Did you guys notice, was he called on, or did he just interject?
Yeah, I think that was one of the times that he jumped in. It was really, really good that he did so. He actually brought up that same kind of line, that big New Hampshire dinner where all the candidates spoke. You can find it on YouTube. I think it was about 9.5 minutes of like distilled Yang awesomeness. And he by far got the most applause from everybody else's camp. And it was with more or less that line and kind of all the stuff that we know about condensed into a shorter thing. But that's the thing, like he could lead the entire Democratic Party. Like that listening to him in a room of 10,000 people like completely totally freak out and be like, yep, that guy's awesome. It's just a matter of kicking out about 4 senators and then we should be good to go.
Yeah, I think the one area where him staying in the debates really is relevant isn't necessarily because watching the debates changes people's minds. I think it's because it's a sign that he's a real candidate, right?
Yep.
I mean, Bloomberg, I think that would hurt him if he didn't have $1 billion to spend, Oh,
he would be nowhere.
And he has a really compelling line for why he's not in the debates, right? It's because I'm not taking money from anybody. So, of course, he doesn't need it, but I mean, okay, I get it. They made one of the requirements donations, and he's not even trying to get donations, probably because he knows he couldn't get them, because who's going to send a billionaire a bunch of money? Although people are sending Steyer money, so I don't know.
And if you were to show up on the debates, it would be like everyone against Bloomberg, like everyone like saying, look at this guy, look at what he's doing.
Yeah.
I agree that Yang really had a powerful punch when he brought up the fact that he's not the cause of all of our problems, he's the symptoms. There were a whole bunch of headlines afterwards where it was like Yang says this, and it's so a little weird to me. Like Corey, we talked about this in our own like post-debate discussion, but like it's weird that this moment gets picked up so much when he's essentially saying like, let's talk about the real things. Let's talk about why Trump got elected in the first place. But those things, when you like delve into it, are the exact same things that seem to like just bounce off the wall when it comes to scarcity mindset. How are people living? Why did people vote for Trump? And how a universal basic income would really help with that. The freedom dividend, this is the core part of my campaign. As soon as you actually bring up those terms and he starts to talk about that a little more concretely, that's when he gets like all of this criticism about the only thing he talks about is a universal basic income. I can't believe it. So it's a little bewildering to me that everyone seems to agree that Yang says he does a good job when he says that. But if he goes any further than that, it all just bounces off of him. In my opinion, it's weird.
So, yeah, I'm not sure that it bounces off because the number of people that are on board for UBI is going up like 5% a week or some stupid thing. I mean, that I made that number up. You get the idea, right? Like that and I've said this before, but the idea that we're talking about UBI and it's like well established in the Overton window now is already insane, right? Like that is an unspeakably big idea. And big deal that's actually around now. So what we're seeing is basically the first little like, first they ignore you part of the campaign. And honestly, what we haven't seen yet is any real pushback, which will come, right?
Yeah.
Like they're like the entire business community telling them that they're going to be stuck with a 10% VAT. They haven't even caught on that this is a real thing yet.
Yeah.
And when it does, you think union busters are bad, they're going to fucking lose their minds, right? Yeah. Now, some of the tech companies that can actually swallow that and not worry about it, it's, they're not going to care at all. Everything's going to be, entirely, totally fine from them, which is kind of what we're hearing already. They can swallow that easily. But that's the thing. Like, it's still having to get through to people that are not used to like new ideas anyway. And now you're going to tell them we're just going to give $1,000 a month to everybody. And it's actually going to be a panacea because it kind of is, right? It's that one shot that you can take that will do more for homelessness than anything else, that will do more for the working poor than anyone else, that will basically be reparations by another name and be economic and social justice in that way, even though it's not comparative. It's still $1,000 a month to communities that really, really deserve it, right? Millions and millions and millions. So I think people just need to get used to the idea that they're actually having to face it.
Early on, Yang called his campaign the Revolution of Reason, or somebody else called it that, I guess, and then he claimed it. That's the problem. People aren't very reasonable. The average person is not voting based on a rational analysis of comparing and contrasting the policies of all the candidates, right? They vote for somebody they like. They vote for somebody who they think has experience. They vote for somebody who is a loyal Democrat in the case of a lot of partisans. That's the real challenge for Yang. I think that if he had a chance, or if he has a chance to run again in 2024, that he'll start out with more name recognition. People will already associate him with being part of the Democratic Party. He very likely will have been in an administration of a Democratic president unless Trump gets reelected. So that would put him in a different situation, right? He now has more experience in government. He's more clearly associated with the party, has more name recognition. Right now, I think that we in the YangGang maybe have made a little bit of a mistake by overemphasizing policy and by overemphasizing the freedom dividend in particular. Because I agree with you, Corey, that if there was a policy that is going to do more than any other single policy, that would be it, right? But he has like 200 policies. And so I'm a little worried that the people who are phone banking and the people who are canvassing are reinforcing people's misconception that Yang is just the freedom dividend guy. So, I mean, first of all, if you're phone banking and canvassing, thank you for doing that. Keep doing that. I am definitely not like gonna say anything bad about anybody who's phone banking and canvassing. But if you want to get really good at it and be really effective at changing people's minds, take the time to learn about a few more policies, right? And Corey and I read basically all of his policies out loud, word for word, the entire thing through in our podcast. So if you don't have time to read them, put your headphones on while you're running or driving or whatever, and we'll read them to you. But yeah, Yang has a lot of policies, and even if he didn't have the freedom dividend, he would still be the best candidate with the best ideas. He has a lot of really good policies. He convinced Bernie Sanders to adopt the democracy dollars thing, which is a good idea of his that I'm glad is spreading around. He's got a lot of good ideas. He's not just the UBI guy.
And I completely agree with what you're saying. And this was was shown in the debates a lot of times. And I noticed Steyer did this a lot. They would go through, they would spend an entire 15 minutes talking about foreign policy. And Steyer would butt in and say, listen, we are all kind of on the same page. Our differences are minute compared to how alike we are. The most important thing is how do we beat Donald Trump? He comes back to electability, which is the most important thing for the voters. You're right about how they don't really vote based on reason. That kills me.
I mean, some of them do. Probably the ones who listen to your show and our show do. But it's for those of us who are reasonable, we have to really remind ourselves we're not the average person. And politics is about winning. It's not about being right.
Yeah, at the end of the day, Steyer did really well in the debate, and that's exactly why. If you poll, and again, if you haven't listened to The Wilderness yet, go do it. Right, they unpack and they do focus groups, and they really drill down into the kind of voters that we need to get to win. Right, and honestly, beating Trump is the number one thing on Democrats' minds, and we're in the Democratic Party. Right. I get that we're in the vanguard and we're attempting to create an ascended wing of the Democratic Party, but we still need them to do anything. And that's always going to be true because the Republican Party is a joke. And if you try and run independent, anything north of a congressman, you're going to lose. Right. So we have to be within that. So understanding the electability argument, I think, is going to be critical for Yang.
He'll probably lose in Congress, too, for that matter.
Yeah, no, it's I wanted to throw Congress a bone. Right?
Honestly, they've got one or two independents, something like that.
It's real small.
Yeah,
and from tiny markets.
Yeah.
So within the first 30 minutes, I thought it was pretty interesting that the moderators clearly set up a battle between Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigiig, who performed very well in Iowa, and it was a little disingenuous to me seeing how they clearly were attacking Bernie's self-described profession that he is a socialist. And they were like, please tell us why you think that, to other candidates, why you think socialism is bad. Whereas on the flip side, you would never have a candidate say, Bernie, please tell us why you think moderate or centrism is going to wind up ending up very badly. They were all so clearly just hopping on the bandwagon against Bernie Sanders. I think Sanders held up very well in the face of those attacks, but it was frustrating to see.
I was happy to see it.
Well, like, it's weird because, I mean, I don't, like, Sanders really isn't even a socialist. I mean, he talks about how he is a socialist, and I think that that's dangerous because of the type of crowd that foments around his campaign. Oh no, I've opened a can of worms here, but
no, I agree with everything you just said. I just have had this conversation 8 million times.
Yeah. Like the fact that it's like furthering the misunderstanding of what socialism is, and that entire thing of like, no, this is what we're actually trying to do. Like, Sanders was very good when he was bringing it all back to like, we can't make progress unless we deal with this issue. And if you look at Trump, he's dealing with the issues all wrong, but everyone else is just kind of staying on the tide of just terms.
That's the problem that I have there, though, because I don't think that's true. I think that in 2015, he shocked the establishment, like Trump shocked the establishment in the GOP. They were both hostile outsiders who did a takeover of a party that they weren't really members of. And the establishment responded by officially putting a lot of Bernie Sanders' goals on their official party platform. And a lot of the other people running in this primary also support those policies. They might not support as hardcore a version of them as Bernie Sanders does, but, you know, Corey and I have gone over this a lot. I mean, the polls just show that, yes, a majority of Americans support Medicare for all, as in making Medicare available as a public option in competition with private insurance as Medicare exists now. That's what Medicare is. Make that available to everybody and not just senior citizens. That is supported by something like 58%. It's a big majority, and that could actually pass Congress. But the number of Americans who support a single payer system, which remains the minority in the developed world. Most countries that have universal health care have a combination of public and private insurance. They make public insurance available to everybody, and they allow people who want private insurance to purchase it. I understand why Bernie Sanders doesn't like that policy, but the fact of the matter is only 13% of Americans support that policy. So, okay, I guess he's trying to out-woke and out-left himself now in order to stand out in a crowded field full of Democrats who support his social democratic agenda, not democratic socialist agenda, because those are not the same things. Norway is not socialist. So, yeah, I mean, why then? Why? Does he actually want to move the needle forward, as we say, or is it all just about ego? Because that his version of that policy isn't going to pass right now. He's got kudos to him for persuading. He played a huge role, along with AOC and other allies, in persuading a majority of Americans to support Medicare for all. I think that's an amazing accomplishment of his. Why can't he just declare victory?
Right.
You know? But he's still got a lot more work to do on persuading them to go all the way to single payer. And if he does that, great. President Yang will sign it. President Biden will sign it. Any Democratic president will sign that bill if he manages to pass Congress. The reason they're not running on that policy is because it's not popular.
Mm-hmm. I think I agree with that.
Okay, hold on. It would be popular if people understood it.
Well, like, sure, and you, cool. I get it, and you know, I just did the same thing. Andrew Yang would be doing so much better if people were smarter. I hear you, but I also said it's about winning, not being right.
Oh, no, 100%. I completely agree there. And the really sad thing for me, the tragic thing, frankly, and I've actually talked to Bernie supporters that understood this and agree with me. You know, we were listening to how he was very honestly talking about and comparing it to candidates. Single payer, you know, your taxes are going to go up, but your bankruptcies and your premiums are going to go to zero. Right. And he would repeat that over and over and over again. And people still hit him on the math. And, oh, my God, it's going to cost $40 trillion, which is like a Republican talking point that's completely disingenuous and idiotic because current spending is going to be $45 trillion. Right. And like just should be completely and totally just sticking to his guns on training people that it's a trade off. Right. The average cost is going to go down, yada, yada. But he stopped doing that. Right. He basically just said, no, we'll figure out a way to pay for it. No big deal, yada, yada. And basically just like, OK, my supporters are idiots. So we're just not going to, and potential supporters are idiots. So I'm just not going to bother anymore. And if you're not educating people on how the actual policy is going to come about, then you've basically just pissed on your own legacy because you're not actually doing the work to convince people that it's a good idea, which is why the polling is reflecting it exactly the way that it's doing it now.
Yeah, and it also could just be that America is not there yet, right? Along with, again, most developed countries. You know, the NIH doesn't outlaw duplicative private insurance. You know, I get that. I understand that they do that in Canada and it works. And I think Bernie Sanders, it's popular there, right? Just like the NIH is popular. All of these universal healthcare programs are popular. There's more than one way to skin a cat. And I worry that Sanders is dividing the Democratic Party in a way that is going to cost us the election because he's pretending that these little academic differences, which will make no difference in reality and the reality of politics, are what it's all about. You know, I mean, we lost our own Bear Cave guy. I'd love to get AJ back. You know, I feel like I was really fair to him. He told me he's like, Rio, you're the only conservative that I respect because you're really honest. And I was like, cool, you know, like I can talk to this guy. But we lost him to the Bernie Sanders group, and now he's not doing Bear Cave anymore. And it's because he's been persuaded by Bernie Sanders that it's single payer or bust. Well, no, it damn well isn't.
Yeah, it's not. Again, as a proponent for, you know, Canadian single payer, which I totally am, I'm not dumb enough to also not know that the 7 other countries with the next best healthcare systems have combinations that aren't necessarily exactly like that, right? There
and
are
that are
different
still
ways
really popular and that still make sure everybody gets the healthcare they need.
Right.
Yeah,
and also like still overall 3 times less cost for the government. It's still mostly government run or whatever, but it allows for that kind of wiggle room, and there's no reason why we wouldn't do it. My worry is that people don't trust a situation like that, Rio, because you know lobbyists will come in and try and murder anything. So if you give them any room, if you give like you know any combination where a private company can come in and erode the system, they'll come and do it, right? Which is where
I agree with that, but I think the solution to that is democracy dollars, right? Which
exactly
both of those candidates support, so that's good, right?
Yep.
Yeah. By the way, I think that Sanders did extremely well. I actually, this is kind of strange to say out loud, but I think this was the best debate for the party in a way, because I think that everybody did very well. I think that people went after Sanders hardcore, like you said, and he did a good job defending himself. He did fall back into the, you know, stump speech every now and then, but people like his stump speech. But he was good at deflecting attacks. As somebody who is not a Sanders supporter, I have to admit he deflected those attacks well, and I think that it strengthened his position. I think Pete did a really good job too. He was the front runner coming out of Iowa, so a lot of people were attacking him, and he also did a really good job deflecting the attacks. Corey, you're right. I think Steyer did a good job reminding everybody that it's about beating Trump and that we all have more in common than we don't, which is something, of course, Andrew Yang would agree with. That said, his ideas are head and shoulders above the others. They are definitely not all the same, right?
No,
and I'm increasingly of the opinion that I think, especially after the DNC moved left and embraced Sanders's policies, which Yang also supports. He supports Medicare for all. After that happened, I think that Yang is now the real outsider. I think that Sanders looks like an establishment insider in comparison. I mean, he has a mainstream media that treats him like a real candidate, gives him the coverage that he deserves. I'm sure the supporters of every candidate think that their guy deserves more coverage than they get, but he's getting a lot, right? And he has the benefit of a Democratic Party whose platform reflects his policies. Yang is not being taken seriously by the media, and his ideas are more heterodox in the Democratic Party of today than Sanders's policies are in the Democratic Party of today. So he really has an uphill battle there. Is it true that they turned off his mic? They say that after every debate. Does anybody have any facts about that?
So the part that you brought up when he responded to Pete, he interjected. There was a moment that you could hear him through Pete's mic before he actually spoke. I actually don't think that this was them turning it on once they realized the mistake. I think that was more of a like he had a noise gate, or each candidate couldn't speak above each other. The levels were just altered. To me, there's no way to prove it. I think that it could have just been audio engineering, things. It's not a good look to try and accuse them of doing that.
That reminds me, I think there's something that we really need to talk about. And Corey and I haven't had a chance to talk about this yet. It relates to the debate. But there was that poll that showed, was it an Emerson poll? I forget who the polling house was, because you guys can remind me, but it basically broke down the supporters of all the candidates. And it said what percentage of their supporters would vote for the candidate, would vote for the nominee if it wasn't their guy, right? And we can say, well, no, if it wasn't their guy or gal. Yeah. And the, Yang, 50% of them said they wouldn't, right? Which doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise you guys because you're part of the YangGang. But I mean, he's bringing in a lot of independents. He's bringing in a lot of Republicans. Sanders also looked like a lot of his people weren't going to vote, but not as many as Yang. Yep. And so I guess what I want to talk about, and I'd like to hear what you guys think about this, but it seems to me that two things could be true at the same time. One could be that the partisan Democrats have a right to be upset about that, but that they need to get over it and endorse Yang anyway. That would be my position. Because I think that they're right to be upset about it because, I mean, it certainly doesn't look like he's a team player in that respect, right? But when you get past that initial gut reaction, which I think is justified emotionally in a lot of ways, especially when they would be running against somebody as awful as Trump. So I want to say, I think that they're right to be upset about that. And I constantly tell my fellow YangGangers, just, none of this Yang or bust nonsense, right? I think that's stupid. Don't do that. So I share that frustration. But at the same time, the fact that he has so many supporters who aren't going to vote if he's the nominee is actually the reason why he needs to be the nominee. 100%. And I mean, he like I said earlier, he's actually bringing in people who have this populist rage, and he's redirecting it, channeling it in a way that brings people together instead of dividing Americans against one another. We don't need class hatred. We don't need war, racial animosity being stoked up by people. We need somebody who's going to remind us that we have more in common with each other than our differences. And it's going to put America back on track. But
Corey, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I mean, as a partisan Democrat and making no apologies for it in any way, shape, or form, and surrounded by partisan Democrats, that reaction was instantaneous. How in the hell are you trying to win a Democratic primary when half your people would literally just go and run off? And it's I think you're right to say that it's understandable, but a split second later you have to think, okay, there are basically two sides to this argument, right? If Andrew Yang were to win the primary, literally every Democrat would be super excited to vote for him, and then tack on ex-Trump supporters and independents, right? And yes, the opposite isn't true. There are people that wouldn't vote. There were people that would stay home. Bernie Sanders has some of those too, or whatever. But the operant rule should always be thinking about two different things in an election: turnout, which as Democrats, we're good at and getting better at all the time, and persuasion. And Yang is good at persuasion. He's good at building the tent such that the tent gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then we have actually more people to turn out. So yeah, I saw that. I mean, Greg had that reaction. But I mean, I had a split second where I had that reaction too, right? Because I mean, we're Democrats hanging out with Democrats, and how the fuck on God's green earth could you even consider not going out to vote or voting for Donald Trump? That makes you, to me, a fucking idiot.
I mean, I had that reaction too. I was like, oh man, that's not good.
We're in an office. We're in Greg's office building, and apparently, I'm not supposed to drop giant F-bombs, really loud ones. Okay. I got my big headphones on.
You're just gonna screaming the F-bomb in his office.
Everything's fine.
You're also gonna demonetize me again, so.
Your take, Seth.
So I actually had the opposite initial reaction. I loved seeing that number, and I'm going to explain why. But it's also something that bewilders me, because what that said to me, and from what the headlines I was reading at the time were saying, is that Yang is galvanizing all of these disenfranchised voters, people who don't typically turn out. But the issue is that those people aren't being represented in landline polls anyway. So there's a split when I consider that narrative. If that narrative were to be true, and I picked it up as this means something great is about to happen in Iowa. If those kind of numbers, you're going to have a whole bunch of people who haven't been represented in the polls, except for this poll, I guess, show up in support for Andrew Yang. Because the vote blue, no matter who, is all across the line except for a little bit with Bernie. And then there's Yang. I'm so curious as to where those numbers are coming from, if those people are the ones that we're saying aren't being represented in the polls, right? If it's true, though, and perhaps he did overperform in the first round of the Iowa caucuses, what you would expect to see if those numbers are true is that Yang will really pull through in New Hampshire today by getting a whole bunch of unrepresented voters.
Right.
But if you run the math on it, the best that we can hope for on that is 100% beat on the polls, right?
Right.
Just because that, like, if you're polling 7% and half your people are independents and ex-Republicans that would not necessarily be polled, if you're polling at 7, that means you can be polling at 15, right? And that's if they all show up. Which I don't know if you knew this, but independents fucking suck at showing up. Excuse my French. Again, I'm going to hell. Right? They're like, but swing voters too. They have a tendency to be super flakes, right? So, but again, obviously Yang is getting people passionate enough that I think that's really possible, which is why I get excited about it. But like people saying, "Oh my God, we're going to win New Hampshire. We're going to win New Hampshire." I want to tamp that down because there's nothing in the polling that says that's possible. Nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, part of the problem, of course, is like a national poll isn't necessarily going to make a difference in a state primary because we don't know how that all breaks down.
Well, my question is that 50%, who are they? And I know that like Corey, you think it's the same if they're apathetic or if they're voting for Trump. But I think that there's something to be said about the apathy part because the majority of people in this country do not vote at all. And if you, and this goes back to the fact that this would indicate that he is someone that everyone needs to galvanize behind immediately, because if you are picking up those people who are generally apathetic, then you're the one who wins.
I agree. Yeah, I mean it is by far the biggest voting block, and he's absolutely creating enough interest that those people are getting back into politics and having a voice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that apathy. I think that apathetic people aren't getting picked up by even that poll. So I don't think that people who don't vote at all don't tend to get polled. So I don't think that that's a big chunk of the 50%. I think it's a reflection of the fact that he's getting swing voters and independents and Republicans. That's what I think it's a reflection of. And probably the kinds of swing voters and independents and Republicans who have been registered Democrat in the past for whatever reason. That's probably why the poll's picking them up. But here's the thing. Those are the votes you need to win an election, right? And Bernie Sanders made that argument in the 2015 primary, and I think he was right to, because Clinton was running away with she had a big majority of partisan Democrats, but Sanders was the guy who was getting independents and even some Republicans. And especially now that the GOP has gone alt-right and it has these kind of left-wingy positions on trade and foreign policy. I mean, Sanders has more in common with Trump than he does with Clinton in some ways. So that's why he was getting the Republican votes. And in Yang's case, he's attracting a lot of the same people because he's offering different solutions to some of the same problems that the populist left and the alt-right care about, right? Instead of scapegoating foreign workers for automation, he's actually pointing out that automation is the problem. So I don't want to say that he's like Sanders and Trump, but he is addressing the same problems in a better way.
I agree. And I also brought this up at the last talk that me and Corey had I think it's going to be completely different answering that question of would you vote blue no matter who today than it will be actually when it comes time to vote in the general election, because at that point we're going to have an entire half of a year of Trump continually doing the same thing he's been doing for the past 3 years, and people are really going to have to ask themselves, do I want more of this? And I think we can rely on that reality, but you can't base that in any kind of factual statement.
The problem is a lot of people take a lot of joy in it, especially if you are of a populist inclination, where you think that the establishment is really crooked and every single member of the elite society is evil and all the regular politicians don't look out for you. And the mainstream media is phony, is fake news. If that's your worldview, then seeing somebody piss all over our institutions might actually give you a bit of schadenfreude.
I find it hard to believe that the people that do have that worldview would even admit that they would be willing to cross the aisle in the first place. Like, if they have enough self-introspection to say, I would like a change, and I think that this is the change to go for, I find it hard to believe that they would then, really look into themselves and say, man, no, I can't bring it. I'm actually going to go back to let's piss all over everything again, considering the degree of how bad the pissing is. I thought the same thing in 2016, because I refused to turn out for Hillary. I was like, you know what? I'm sick and tired of everything. But in the 3 years since, I could not imagine that it would have been this bad. I
Yeah.
regret it.
I was imagining how bad it was going to be in real time, and Greg and I talk about it all the time. It's like significantly worse than the worst case scenario that we thought of, and I thought I was being unreasonable. And that all of that doesn't include a 7-2 Supreme Court, Seth, for the rest of your life.
Right. You got to consider that.
So here's the thing
honestly,
about
that's all anyone needs to consider. That's it. Like, forget literally everything else. That's why everyone has to vote against Trump. Period.
Here's the thing about that 50%, right? I think that right now it's 50% because Yang's surge as an outsider came from this grassroots momentum, which is which by definition has to be more ideologically diverse than his ultimate coalition would be if he were the nominee, right? So what I mean by that is he's not going to be able to get as many Trump voters and Republican voters as Democrat voters in the end if he's actually the nominee, right? Most Republicans are going to go with Trump. We just know that, right? He's going to be able to persuade more to come over to the other side than anybody else. I think the math proves that's definitely true, right? But it's not going to be a huge percentage. It's going to be a consequential small percentage of Republican voters, right? And so I think that when he's polling at 20, 30, 40% in the primary, if he's still in the race, and he's one of the last two people, the last three people or whatever, his coalition is not going to be 50% people who won't vote for the nominee anymore because it'll be made up of more regular Democrats. It's just that the base that got him this far has been more ideologically diverse than his ultimate coalition would need to be. And I think that his biggest weakness as a candidate is that he's not getting partisan Democrats. I don't meet a lot of like Trump voting Yang supporters, but I don't meet a lot of other never Trump conservative Yang supporters. I don't meet a lot of people who, like me, think that Hillary Clinton was perfectly acceptable to a conservative and Trump was not, right? I don't meet a lot of people like me in the YangGang yet. And you guys, we need people like me in this campaign to win. We need people who actually like the establishment. We need people who think that our society is good and don't want to blow it up. We need those people in the YangGang. And that what that poll suggests is that he's not reaching those people yet.
Well, like, while having you in the YangGang is fancy and awesome, what he really needs is more people like me and Greg. Like, we're, that Democratic activists on the ground is the whole
that
game.
Too. Yeah. Well, I think
in the primary, in the general, you're totally right. I mean, I think that would happen.
I think in the general, you need, but what I mean is, how do I put this? You and Greg are in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. Yang's doing okay there, right? He's doing okay there. He's not getting a lot of conservative and moderate and centrist Democrats. He needs to be getting those people.
Yeah.
He's getting the populist bases of both parties. He's not getting the establishment elitist snobs. He needs those people.
That's true. True. Well, and I think that's where I think that the long-standing institutional memory and tribalism starts to come into play, because it's, you're just sort of, unless you're sort of part of the team and have paid your dues, right?
Yeah.
Unless your name is Pete Buttigieg, then they're not really going to let you in.
Yeah, you're very right, and this is why the media's coverage of Yang is really kind of detrimental. The fact that they haven't picked him up at all. He's not being shown to the group of people who need to see him the most.
Yeah. I mean, he's been polling double Amy Klobuchar for 6 months, and Amy Klobuchar gets about 20 to 30 times more media coverage.
Yeah. Yep.
So, but she's like, if you were, and again, if electability actually made sense, and I'm not at all sure that it does, right? Like the whole Midwestern path and all that kind of stuff. I think that's all made up now. That might have been true in the frickin' 90s, but I think that has gone away to a large extent. But they'll basically make that math. Greg just totally gave me the stink eye again. On this podcast. We probably should have had Greg on this too.
I don't know if I think I might actually agree with Greg here. I think electability matters a lot, and I think it's a real thing. It's true. I think what you were getting at, Corey, is that it matters less because it's such a partisan time that we live in. Trump is such a polarizing figure that people will tend to be voting Democrat or Republican no matter what in most cases, certainly at least the people who have a history of voting.
Right.
And so that means that the electability of an individual candidate matters less than it has in the past to some extent. But I think it also matters a lot. I mean, we're engaged in a debate about what we want the future of the Democratic Party to look like. And Corey gives me shit for it, but like, Trump's hostile takeover of the GOP left people like me homeless. And I would love to make the Democratic Party my lifelong party from now on. But whether or not that happens has to do with the ideological direction that the party takes. And right now we have three options. We have status quo, we have democratic socialism / social democracy, depending on whether you believe Sanders' own words or not. But it's clearly something distinct from the status quo. And then we have human capitalism. Those are our three options as a party right now. And that debate, that's going to make a difference in terms of how electable the person is, because it does cut through partisanship, because it's really getting to the heart of like the future of the ideas that this party stands for.
You know,
I mean, sorry, Seth, go ahead.
I view the terms democratic socialism and human-centered capitalism as synonyms. They're the same thing, just with a different slight lean, right? Like, because people on the left will say, human-centered capitalism is an oxymoron because capitalism cannot be human-centered. And then if you look at socialism, like real socialism, what people want when they're talking about socialism, the Kyle Juriks of the world, you can't have like a democracy and socialism at the same time. They're both like oxymorons, but the same thing. The real important thing is how are we able to like center this around the values that we all agree upon. And I think Sanders does the best when he's defending himself against attacks on socialism and saying, well, this is what people care about. It's beyond.
Well, I mean, so this is like, actually, I almost agree with you, Seth. I wrote a blog post yesterday. I don't know if Corey read it yet, but I think you'll like it. I wrote a blog post yesterday where I basically broke down the differences between capitalism, socialism, social liberalism, or social democracy. Those are actual literal synonyms, and human capitalism. The thing is, human capitalism is I called it social liberalism or social democracy 2.0. And so to the extent that Bernie Sanders is standing up for some kind of a social democratic platform and not an actual socialist platform, it's 100% accurate to say that Sanders and Yang both represent a platform that falls under the umbrella of social democracy. But so does every other Democrat running. Frankly, so does Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump promised not to cut Social Security. That is a social democratic policy.
His budget?
Yeah.
Right?
His budget?
Yeah.
Did you see his budget? I don't even want to get into it now, but like that was bullshit. But yeah, no, I think taking the social democracy versus human-centered capitalism, I think it's like UBI versus freedom dividend. One of them is a much better term, right?
It's better branding.
The story that it's telling about what it is far, is just far superior to actually attach itself to the real world things that we need to actually be talking about, right?
Yeah, it's better branding, but I want to make sure I also made what I think is an even more important point than the branding, although the branding is huge. And you're completely right. It's social liberalism 2.0 versus social liberalism 1.0. That's the difference, right?
Yeah, no, I agree.
Bernie Sanders is running on, he's doubling and tripling down on the old-fashioned form of social democratic policy, which has worked or not worked to some extent in some countries here and there. But in the 21st century, with automation coming down the pipeline, we need to upgrade to 2.0. But you're right. I mean, they are both. So, I mean, literally everybody running in both parties right now are social democrats. Americans don't understand political science. We have a capitalist economy, and we have a government with a social safety net, right? That is social democracy, just like the rest of the first world. That's the reality. And we're all social democrats here. The debate is about what specific policy hacks do we think will work best.
Yeah, I mean, that's the fight I want to have.
But that's not what voters.
That's the fight I want the Democratic Party to be all about.
And that's exactly what voters avoid is policy discussion.
Voters will surprise you, I think, because you have to get these things to a tipping point, right? There are definitely a lot of voters that aren't taking this seriously. If you were, spending a lot of time doing this kind of analysis in 2015, and you brought up Medicare for all, you were having exactly the same conversation. Right, there's like Medicare for all is clearly what you need to do, but all of these people are idiots and no one will get on board. And why the hell is this happening? And oh my God, right? And because it takes time.
Yeah.
Right. So
and UBI is polling extremely well already in a really short window. So that's amazing.
And those numbers are only going to go up. However this plays out over the course of this year. The Democratic Party in 2024 is going to have UBI as the center of its thing, or the Republicans will steal it if they're smart.
So it seems like we're all in agreement that the debate didn't make a huge difference. But if we had to name, for the people who did watch it and who are on the fence, who do we think strengthened their position the most coming out of the debate?
I hate it, but I think Klobuchar did.
Oh, that's interesting. Why?
Well, because clearly whatever she's doing is working, and she was trying to position herself as someone who was like the right choice for X and Y reason, and I don't understand why this is the case, but people seem to agree with her on that. And she didn't, like, as long as she just maintained the course of where she already is, she's going to come out on top and really take advantage of the fact that Biden has not been performing well. Biden said, one of the first things Biden said was Iowa was a hard hit, right? Terrible framing to put that, like, and everyone was talking about that afterwards, is like, that's the last thing that voters in South Carolina want to hear right now, is him like admitting defeat in Iowa. And then Bernie and Pete are stuck in this total kind of two for all, and then you've got Klobuchar, who like outperformed in Iowa. I can't point to a specific thing in the debate that she said that made me say this, but it's just the feeling that I had afterwards.
Well, I think a couple of things prove your point. I mean, the media's been looking for an excuse to back her anyway, and she had a very plausible, and she had some lines or whatever that I think were strong. But I think you're right. Like, it's basically just like, do no harm and make the electability argument, which I think she did, really well for people that buy into that. But she raised $3.5 million within the 72 hours after the debate. And the media was already looking for an excuse to talk about her, as they have been, initially. So they're just going to amplify that message and that narrative. So she's going to get a bump. Honestly, like, I don't think it's going to last. What's really messed up is South Carolina. Who picked up all the black vote in South Carolina that Biden lost?
Bloomberg. Well, no.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Bloomberg is crushing, dude. Like, it. Yeah. You can buy an election, and that motherfucker, just do it.
So, Corey, so you agree that it was Klobuchar then?
I mean, yeah, I think Klobuchar got the biggest bump. I think Steyer did the best, but I also he's not really in sort of a place that is going to capture the attention of people that will amplify his message. But yeah, I mean, I think I would have to agree that Klobuchar probably did the best. I mean, and again, I think you're right about Bernie too. Like, he, is used to getting attacked and got attacked a bunch. Buttigieg did all right too. Like, that's the thing. Like, they're all pretty good. And head to head, head to head, they all beat Trump, one. Which is another thing.
It's hard to choose one. It's hard to choose one because I think they all did well. I was not actually considering Klobuchar one of my choices, Seth, but you kind of persuaded me, so now she belongs out there too. I don't know. I mean, like, I guess, like, on balance, I think Bernie Sanders got the game out the most because he came in second place in Iowa, and a really strong debate performance in that context is an extremely powerful thing. I would have said Pete, because he was the front runner and he got attacked and he defended himself really well. And the reason I'm not saying Pete is because I don't think there's anything that man can do that will change the way black voters look at him, at least not while we still have a wide field.
Mm-hmm.
I think that he, unless he gets a big chunk of the black vote in South Carolina, he is not going to be the nominee for sure. It doesn't matter. And we keep forgetting that, like, Yang was pulling ahead of Buttigieg in some national polls going into Iowa. He did well in a state that is extremely white, and you can't win a Democratic primary with black voters not liking you, right? And so I kind of feel like, I think that under normal circumstances, if that weren't the case, I would say Pete was the winner because he was in the lead. He got attacked. He defended himself well. He did everything he could right. It's by no fault of his own. But for some reason, he is not getting through to black people. And I don't think there's anything he can do to fix that. I think his campaign is pretty much damned.
Well, let's look at what he did. Go ahead, Seth. Oh, no, Corey, you.
I was saying before Iowa that if Pete did well in Iowa, that would be the last place that he did well. And I get, like, if he came in and got like a resounding win, that might have translated to a bump.
Right.
Yeah. So all the people are like, oh my God, they tried to put their finger on the scale or whatever. Well, it didn't work. right? Because like if you tie, which is at best what you can say, right? Because he got a couple more delegates, but Bernie Sanders got more votes, and I think that's a really, really arguable. Like, yeah, okay, you might have won, but who gives a shit, right? Bernie Sanders is probably going to win New Hampshire, and I think the rest of the field, I think, is going to be a lot more of a toss up. Elizabeth Warren has got a massive ground game in New Hampshire, so like that, is a possible thing. I think there's going to be people writing in Bloomberg, even though he's not on the ballot. Which is going to be completely and totally messed up. So we really don't know. But I think there's a really good possibility that Buttigieg will be done like or be very visibly not doing as well in this. And then I haven't looked at his polls in Nevada, but yes, in South Carolina he's not going to place.
Yeah,
right.
He won't even be in the top 3, and so it'll be over, like completely over.
You look at what he said during the debates. He was asked about an increase in incarcerations after he got into office, and like he turned around and was like, "Well, look at all the gang activity." He started talking about gangs after the question was, black incarceration increased after you took office, and then he immediately like went to gangs. Like he does not have the ability to actually position himself to take minority votes like that. And
I think part of the reason I like him is because he's kind of like the log cabin Republicans used to be before Trump took over that party. All right. No, I mean, he's not, it's not even that he's wrong about that. It's just that is a racially sensitive conversation, and he is not equipped to have that conversation. He doesn't know how to explain that there's a difference between taking a hard stance on crime and being against black people. Mm-hmm. He can't explain that. And Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden have similar baggage, and they are able to explain it in a way that reassures black people. Pete just can't do it.
Let's like in an immediate this week kind of thing. An example of exactly this. Bloomberg took half of Biden's support among African Americans to South Carolina. Half. Stop and frisk was fucking Bloomberg's idea.
Yeah.
Right? Like it doesn't get any more profiling than that. Like basically ever. Right?
You know what, Corey?
That amount of baggage is incredible.
Yeah, you just made my case for me, because I've been saying all along, I don't think that people's dislike of Buttigieg is because of what they say it is. Because if it were his, admittedly like pretty rocky history dealing with race in his town, that would, then they wouldn't be going for Biden. They wouldn't be going for Clinton. They wouldn't be going for Bloomberg. It's because it's cultural stuff. It's because he wears fancy suits, and he went to Harvard, and he's a gay guy, and he's young, and he comes off as a bit of a snob. He comes off like pretty unlikable to a certain demographic of people, and not just black people. I don't think that working class white people care for him very much either.
Maybe. I was actually I was glomming onto your point that I think you can have, if you've got a $20 million consulting firm running your messaging department, you can basically argue your way around the narratives that will be operating as baggage. Now, granted, Bloomberg would not be able to do that if he was in the media and if he was, on the debate stage, right? Which he's very pointedly ignoring, because that's not where he controls the message. He's already spent $250 million on just like doing ads literally everywhere, where he gets to control the narrative. And the narrative is Trump was a complete and total nightmare, and African Americans are like, I would rather not have a Nazi supporter in the White House, so freaking let's do Bloomberg. Why not? Right?
Yeah. No, I agree. I'm not saying they're necessarily wrong to prefer Bloomberg over Buttigieg. I'm just saying I don't think it's.
But I think the rest of that
I think there's something about his packaging which is reassuring to conservative Democratic voters, and that is turning off other parts of the primary electorate for the same reason.
Yep.
I think it was a win for Yang that he was even in the debate. I think that like the fact that he got back on the debate stage, it reestablished him as a serious candidate, which damn well should have, because again, if you're polling in fourth place in some national polls and you have 7 people on stage, you should be one of them. But whatever. So yeah, that was good. Why, if it wasn't his mic being turned off, why did he stop talking so much in the second half of the debate? Because he came on really strong, and then he was just like, well, sheepishly, if they don't call on me, I'm not going to talk. What was it?
Well, I mean, during the first half of the debate, he really wasn't that active either. They spent at least 20 minutes talking about foreign policy, and Yang was silent the entire time. I mean, he doesn't really have a lot of foreign policy discussion in the first place, but so much of the debates were candidates attacking each other. The thing that Steyer did well is that he butted in and he said, you're all talking about the same thing. Let's talk about why I'm the person who's going to be the one to beat Donald Trump. Yang had to take that spot, and he failed to do so.
I agree.
Because there's nothing else he can do.
That's what I'm wondering. Like, if it wasn't actual sabotage, what the heck?
Honestly, like, we've seen this movie before, right? Yang is constitutionally unable to jump in like that. We've never seen it happen. Like, I think it's happened once.
I find it extremely frustrating because if he were in a 2 or even 3 person race, where the moderators really definitely needed to call on people more evenly because it would be blatantly obvious if they did it. I think he would absolutely devastate his opponents and win every single debate. But a debate with this many people up here, where some people get called on more than others, I mean, it's so phony. It is so phony.
And I mean, like, the times where he's actually called that out have landed really well, right? Like, where, you know, it's all just a big ridiculous show. Like, they asked him about his lack of a tie, for crying out loud. It's completely and totally sort of performative. And on, like, it could very well just be that he's too genuine.
Okay, so I'm going to add a caveat. So I said, for the people who watched the debate and who were undecided, I think Bernie Sanders came out with the most advantage over the debate. But for the people who didn't watch the debate and just read about it or whatever, I think Yang actually won. Because, I mean, I think he came out because of the fact that he was in it. You know what I mean? Like, I think we said the debates don't really change people's minds. So the fact that he at least made the debate stage again might actually be more consequential than anything that anybody said in the debate.
I think you're right, because if he hadn't been, funding would go down, you know, viability would go down, even among, you know, YangGang that might be worried about that kind of thing or whatever. So I think you're probably right. Like, he's still there, he's still in it, and I think we're gonna have a good night tonight.
The one thing that he didn't do well during the debate was him speaking about, and like, this is just something I disagree with Yang on. It was impeachment, and he has a good point when he talks about the fact that we shouldn't get into this cycle of putting past presidents in jail. But I think most of the country disagrees with Trump's acquittal, and he was giving the wrong point when he answered that question, and a lot of people kind of some of the headlines tagged on him for that afterwards. I don't know.
I just don't know why he went there. I mean, it's just maybe it's just because he is such an honest, genuine person that he isn't capable of triangulating.
Right.
I think he's used to being the guy that is allowing Trump supporters into his rallies and then greeting them as human beings.
Yeah, which
is already way better than I would do. But at the same time, like I mean, this is the one place where I disagree with him too. Now, granted, I'm not a unifier. I don't play one on TV. I couldn't fake it if I tried. And he freaking is, right? So that, but again, do that in the general. It's a Democratic primary where 99.99999% of Democrats would literally love to see Trump in jail, because so would the law.
I disagree with Yang on that too. I think that he is 100% right. I'm sure you guys would agree that we have to be careful about, going down the slippery slope into a banana republic where you just throw your opponents in prison, right?
Right.
That would clearly be very bad, right? But that
even
is
going
not,
after Trump.
That's not the same thing as if he had been convicted, or now if he doesn't get reelected. If he doesn't get reelected and some, the federal government and or some state governments go after him for various crimes before the statute of limitations expires. I think that's the main reason. I don't think he likes being president. I think the main reason he wants to get reelected is because he wants the statute of limitations to expire on his crimes. But anyway, so if an independent judiciary were to go after a former president for crimes that he committed while he was in office, I don't think that would be a threat to the rule of law. I think the idea that the president is above the law is a threat to the rule of law. I mean, former Congress people go to jail for things that happened while they were in Congress. What's the difference?
Right.
Yang needs to stop saying that. You're not even right about it, dude. Stop.
Yeah.
Right. Like, we can accept that there's a slippery slope into the type of society he talks about, but there's also a slippery slope into authoritarianism, and that's exactly where we are right now. If you're going to be worried about us going somewhere, it's what's happening as we speak. And that's what people want to hear right now. They don't want to hear Yang trying to defend a. He needs to stop talking about that.
And honestly, it's exactly the kind of thing Obama would have said, and Obama was wrong when he did it.
Yes, yeah,
like, the whole idea that he didn't go after frickin' Bush and Dick Cheney, that also was an error. They lied us into a war that killed 1 million people.
I don't think that the next president should direct his attorney general to go after the former president. I don't think you should do that. I don't think the attorney general should be the president's lackey. Period. I think they should be independent, right? I agree with Obama. I agree with Obama and Yang about that, right? I definitely don't want the president, and like if that were to happen, that would be an impeachable offense.
Well, Trump's already doing it, right? We're seeing the rebound to that already.
He's doing it.
He's literally using Barr to go. Yeah, agree.
Yeah, that's bad. No, I just meant like if something that had nothing to do with the new president, right? Just like, he just went through the normal process of being tried for a crime that he, might have committed and found guilty. That's how the system's supposed to work.
And I don't even think that any of the candidates answered that question as in, yes, I would go ahead and imprison Trump. I think that they would like pivot and they would say Trump is doing incredibly wrong things. He needs to be held accountable for his actions, which is a different answer. There's a little bit more nuance there. That's what Yang needs to try and say. Because, I agree. Independent action needs to be taken against wrongdoings like that.
Yeah, he may have built himself. He may have kind of built himself into a corner, though, because he does rely on Trump voters, not just former Trump voters, but current. Like, basically, if it's not Yang, I'm going to vote for Trump people. He has to be careful about not alienating those people. But he's made it. What I would tell him is, I hear you, but they're not really supporting you because you like Trump. They're supporting you because they like you.
Yeah.
And you need to win partisan Democrats. You're not going to do that saying don't put Trump in jail. It's just not a popular thing to say.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. Like, rule of law is a good idea. Period. And end of answer.
Yep. I completely agree. Let me just see here. I had written some notes and I've been kind of taking them off one by one. I thought it was interesting during foreign policy where they asked Pete exactly what he would do concerning the Soleimani attack. And Pete's answer was, it depends on the circumstances. This is not an episode of 24. And I liked that response because I really just don't like any debate that really focuses a lot on foreign policy because it's unrealistic to expect the president to have so much leverage. You've got this entire cabinet of people who are informing decisions. Like, it's disingenuous to imagine that the president has that much sway, and
no, he shouldn't, right? I mean, that's
unfortunately we're seeing what happens when they do.
Yeah, exactly. We have a guy in the White House right now. We see what happens if he lets his opinion as one American, like, overrule all of the experts in foreign policy. That's not good, right? And I agree. I thought Buttigieg's answer was the right answer. I mean, what else are you going to say? It depends on the circumstances, right?
Yes.
It's like if you were asking him about chess, would you take the queen with your rook? Well, where are the rest of the fucking pieces? It depends.
Right. And that's another moment where Steyer came in and he was like, look at our military budget. There's something deeper that's a problem here. It's the military industrial complex. And another moment where he shined was right there, I think. Buttigieg.
Yeah. See Tom's calculation. He said, "Would you trade 0.67% of the military budget for democracy dollars?"
Wait, has Tom said this?
Tom from Nerds for Yang, not Steyer.
Oh yeah. See, that's a really important part to harp on. Is like how much we are spending, what we can do. We're talking about the wrong things when we're talking about foreign policy here. That's what Tulsi's there for, but she wasn't there.
Well. Yeah, sometimes.
Well,
honestly, I think a much better description. Sorry, Rio.
No, go ahead.
We had Rich Casado on the Moving Forward podcast, and he basically said you could dramatically increase our readiness for modern day problems with cutting 50% of the military budget and just doing smarter things.
Yeah, just it could be 50% of the budget that it is now, and actually keep us safer.
Significantly.
And as an unapologetic neocon hawk, I have to admit he's right. I'm fine with that as long as a smart person like Rich is in charge of what we cut and how we spend our money, right? I don't want somebody going in and just willy-nilly cutting things with blindly without any logic behind it. That wouldn't be good.
that reflects directly the entire discussion of welfare. Like, we can admit, hey, we've got a very bloated, inefficient welfare system. We would do much better with something like a universal basic income, and cut down on the spending and help more people in the long run. I wish that could predominantly take over, and I'm happy to see that more often.
Yeah. I would love for Yang to come out and be extremely forceful on the fact that welfare isn't helping all the people that it says it's supposed to be helping, and it isn't doing that efficiently anyway. And isn't allowing for people to actually get off it. Like Greg's a perfect example, right? Being on disability or whatever. Anytime he works, he goes in the hole.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's like deeply disincentivized to get out of the situation that he's in. And with freedom dividend, none of it would matter.
Yeah, unfortunately, like that kind of nuance is only going to happen if he manages to make it to the top 2 or top 3 people in a debate. The last people standing. If the YangGang needs any motivation to keep donating and keep phone banking and keep canvassing, it should be that. Yang has always been playing the long game. Don't get discouraged. Just make sure that he stays just ahead of whatever the requirements are and stays on that stage until it's the last 2 or 3, and then the debate will matter. Yeah. And he will kill it. He will kill it because he is actually good at making arguments based on logic and facts that are persuasive emotionally as well as rationally. He's just not getting the chance to do it on this big stage. And I know that it's frustrating that he doesn't speak up more, but I mean, if he is playing the long game, that kind of makes sense. And of course, he's also hoping as a backup plan to be on the administration of whoever is the nominee. And You're not going to do that by trashing, like, don't use Bernie Sanders' strategy of just trashing all of the other candidates. Like, I don't want Yang to do that.
Yeah, I agree. Like, if he's following the sort of first do no harm rule, I could see that. I mean, I think that's a principle that he holds anyway, but could absolutely serve him the further, the deeper we get into this primary, for sure.
Today's a big day. Today is a huge day.
It is.
Oh my God.
And what kind of taco? He's a taco? Something about tacos?
It's Taco Tuesday in New Hampshire right now.
Is it Taco Tuesday?
Oh yeah, the 11th, maybe the most consequential Taco Tuesday that this country might ever see. I'm afraid that we might wind up with a burrito at the end of this. And
oh no, Andrew Yang can't lose Taco Tuesday. That's just not right.
Yeah,
no, that's not okay. That's not okay.
Okay, thank you guys for having me on again. I gotta go and calm my nerves.
All right.
Yeah, 7:00's when the show starts, I think.
7? Okay. Yep. So what is it that we saw just before now? Sorry to drag this on a little longer, but what were those numbers referring to that we talked about way ago, the 11% and Klobuchar? Those very few numbers.
What?
Yeah, on the there was, okay, let me just look this up really quick.
I don't know what you're talking about either.
It's on the
Corey, did you stop recording?
So his laptop ran out of memory, so I'm gonna actually have to steal this off the dividend report somehow.
Oh,
yeah, it's recording and then just stopped. So
did you say welcome to the Moving Forward podcast at the beginning?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you did.
No,
okay.
I did.
All right. So I could just trim. I'll just trim it a little bit. That'll be fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I did not record it, but it is going to be up on my YouTube page.
I think there's ways for me to download that.
Okay.
I'll figure it out.
Okay, great. All right. So the last thing that I'll do here is just take a quick look at this, which was...
Yeah, so are you talking about those initial results, Seth?
Yeah. It says here on this page, it's breaking early results are in. First ballots cast. New Hampshire, Amy Klobuchar, 29.6%.
Yeah, look at the number of votes, the actual number of human votes.
Okay, yeah. I think that's 8, 16.
20.
It's 19.
Yeah, the actual number of humans wouldn't fit around a big table.
But who is reporting this?
That's not a big enough sample to be statistically significant.
100 times that wouldn't be statistically relevant. Like, it's not.
I don't know.
It's
actually, it's 1%. So technically, 100 times that would be 100%.
No, this isn't at all 1% though. Like that's
it's not.
Not even.
Oh, they was
no.
reporting as 1%. I thought.
If it was 1%, there would only be 3,000 people voting in the primary. That's obviously not going to happen. It's like 0.0001%.
Guys, this is clearly indicative of some
they
momentum.
It's it's one little town in the middle of nowhere that votes at midnight. And so that's the thing. Like,
why
the
even
second
report
you see
that? That is so fucking weird.
Everyone is so hungry for numbers and news that they'll report anything.
This is why we don't cover the horse race, because it's dumb. Everybody in their left nut record covers the horse race, and it's not interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. It's momentum, actually, guys. I'm gonna disagree with you here, and this is clearly Amy's time to shine. All right.
Momentum.
That I mean,
Seth, I hope you were recording this for outtakes, because that's funny.
Oh yeah, it's all here. It'll all be on YouTube for you guys to pick.
Excellent. Good.
Well, I suppose thank you guys for joining me here on the Dividend Report. Go and check out the Moving Forward podcast. They have such fantastic content all the time. Give them a subscribe, give them a listen. And yeah, I think that's going to do it. We'll end it here. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.